Awesome. So thank you so much, Laura, for joining me. For those who don't know Laura Corcoran, I actually had like a dream that I was going to say that so weirdly. Laura is a beautiful holistic psychologist. She is a mum of two, a dear friend of mine, and has been my mentor for over a year. I credit her to changing my life and really undoing a lot of stuff I didn't even know I was carrying around. So thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure. So excited to be having this conversation, and because this is new for you, like the rebirthing of sharing all of this with a greater audience. And I'm so excited for you.
Thank you. Yeah, I was speaking with someone yesterday and we were chatting about, if we had have known this, if we had have had someone that was talking about this stuff years ago, then the suffering wouldn't have had to be there for so long before we took action. So I really appreciate you coming on. Can you tell me a bit about what you do, Laura?
Of course. I always find this really hard to explain what I do because I just have so many different modalities that I lean on. But basically, as Bree shared, I'm a holistic psychologist. So I was traditionally trained in the medical field and worked my way up as a senior psychologist in the mental health units. And I'd worked in so many different areas in the government. And what I saw a lot of was continuum of suffering and numbing of emotions. And then it took me on this really big journey around trauma and really understanding trauma and how it becomes stored in the body, really understanding conditioning and pre-programming from childhood, and then really understanding again that talk therapy is amazing for venting and, releasing shame around maybe stories that we've not shared with people before. But also there's a deeper level that we need to get to actually release the stored trauma from the body. So that's when I started looking at life holistically, not only embodying the work because I realized that I'd actually not done any form of work on my past. So completely embodying it and then trying different modalities and becoming a breathwork practitioner, a Reiki practitioner, emotional freedom technique with Matrix, emotional processing, reparenting, shadow work, like really working on the energy that's stored in the body. And as you know, I'm so passionate about frequency and energetic frequency. Yeah, so then from embodying this work, I really just knew there was a different way to help to heal other people. And, I just knew that we didn't have to be stuck in this low energetic frequency, which is our past, and a lot of that is run by our thoughts, which creates a feeling, then acts out a behavior. So I then removed myself from the government and went on my own journey and started my own business to help as many people as I could in a collective way to reach a bigger audience. Because that was the thing as well. I noticed I was only working one-on-one with people. And I was just like, I need to get this message to more people. This is why I'm just such a big advocate of the podcast and sharing this message. And now just running this really beautiful business and supporting women like yourself to break free from these old patterns that don't serve them so they can really, truly live in the purpose of why they're here in life.
Love that. And anyone, I know this is probably going to bring up some questions about what happened for me. So if anyone wants to, I guess, listen more in depth, I did tell my story on Laura's podcast, The Truth to Heal, healing OCD, because that was a symptom that I had when I was healing. But I think, why, in your opinion, why is motherhood so triggering? Like, so often we hear, I was fine until I had kids. Like, I've heard that
Yeah.
all the time. Like, these kids drive me nuts. Why is
Mm.
motherhood when all of this stuff comes to the surface?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think naturally as mothers, we're nurturers and we're protectors. And it's like a depth of love that we've never felt before. So that in itself, if you've never felt unconditional love or had to be responsible for another being, that in itself is really confronting. But a lot of the time it amplifies our fears. Everything comes to the surface when we have the responsibility of protecting and looking after this little baby. And then, so it can start from that perspective. So all of these emotions, so like, labels such as postnatal anxiety or postnatal depression, all of these feelings have actually been in your body for years. And when you give birth, obviously there's different changes in your hormones, there's different chemical reactions in the brains. And then if you've got this feeling that's been repressed for a long time, this is when it starts to surface and we get labeled with all of these different things. Where from my perspective, it's a really beautiful way for you to heal whatever's been pushed down for a long time. But there's not many practitioners out there that know this information around trauma. They just think it's, oh, it's anxiety and it's depression and all of these different levels. And of course, the symptoms, hypervigilance or sleeplessness or lack of appetite or whatever it may be, low mood, lack of motivation, whatever it may be, it's important to get support through that. But I would look at getting support from a holistic view, because it doesn't stop there. Like you can, a lot of women have come to me that have been diagnosed with these symptoms previously and then not been able to bear children. I had this one particular client that was diagnosed with postnatal anxiety, and she just had a really hard time, and then had been on medication for a long time and a lot of therapy, and nothing was working. And then she came to me, came off the medication, was trying to fall pregnant for a couple of years and couldn't, and was literally working with me for 6 months. And we was just processing these emotions and getting her to truly love herself and feel safe within her body. And then she felt pregnant and she's had another beautiful boy. So it's really just, having this education and knowing that there's other things out there, and knowing that it doesn't stop there. The triggering doesn't stop there, because our kids are our greatest teachers. One of the things that I really truly believe is that our children chose us as their parents to birth through in order for us to learn and for them to grow on their own journey as well. And what normally happens is that they trigger us. We get confronted. We have no idea what's going on here. We then go into the way that we were conditioned as kids by repressing our children and telling them to be quiet, or don't be soft by crying, or go to your room, or don't back chat, or control, basically, because we can't deal with the emotions that they brought forward for us. But really, if we can look at a different perspective and see this as a really beautiful healing journey for both sides, that's where the true freedom lies. And that's what I've experienced with my own children.
Yeah, absolutely. And even as you were talking, I sort of sit here and realize that it's so subtle. Like when you're, say, for example, my little girl would throw a massive tantrum and I would be so dysregulated. I would scream. I'd be like, oh my God, what are you doing? And I never knew why I reacted like that, because I'm quite a chill person. And at work, if there's an emergency within the hospital setting, I'm like, but at home with my kids, I was like, who the fuck am I? Like, why is this so triggering to me? And it all comes back to how we were conditioned and taught to feel these feelings, right?
Yeah. It's a really great point that you make with that as well, because you felt different in the workplace, but you would have had a different facade in the workplace, which you know as well. Bree that knows everything, Bree that's very well put together, Bree that's regulated. You go back into the home safe space and it's your safe place. And then you've got these little kids that are demanding your time and attention when energetically you might not have the capacity for it, because you've been outsourcing your energy all day long. And then they're bringing these feelings to the surface because you're at your limit. And then what we often do then is we become reactive. And this is when the cycle continues, is we react. Our children then become afraid or respond and learn their own survival ways, because our kids just want to be loved. They want to be accepted. They want to feel safe. They're trying to survive in them for 7 years. That's what they're trying to do. And, if they're not given that co-regulation by us, regulating ourselves, and that safety and that freedom to express their emotions in whatever way feels good for them, then this is where they start to create their own survival patterns. And then later on in life, it then equates to what we would call anxiety or depression or disconnection or, dysfunctions in relationships, because they've learned really maladaptive, which is negative ways of learning how to be in relationships to create that unity and that love.
So I guess what you're sort of saying there is that depression and anxiety, it all stems back to childhood.
Yeah.
So basically what we do if we're unaware is repeat that cycle. So everything we were taught about squishing emotions, we unknowingly teach our children to do that. And then 20 years down the track, they turn around and have a breakdown of some sort.
Yeah, and also with that, what we often try and do is that we've made our parents wrong for the way that they've raised us. You know, why couldn't they love us more? Why couldn't they do this? You know, really being in that victim state and blaming and projecting. And then what we do is we drive from this place of never wanting to be like them. But what we actually don't know is that we actually become them. You know, we've had many conversations which are really confronting. And this was something that I had to do because I was driving from a space of, you know, not wanting to be like my mom. And even though she's an amazing woman, she had particular traits that really frustrated me as a kid. And I was like, I'm never going to be like that. I'm never going to do that. I'm never going to control my partner. I'm never going to manipulate. I'm never. And then when I was confronted by it, well, when I was doing the work and I could had more awareness, I could see how I was controlling and manipulating and making myself right in situations. And it was like this massive smack in the face of, my God, we literally become the person we most condemn. So if that's mom or dad or both of them, you can guarantee that you are holding traits of them within you, because there's a part of you that's still wanting that resolve from mom and dad. And you think by acting it out on a subconscious level, you're going to create this closeness to them, this connection, and this love. What you're doing is you're projecting that onto your own kids. And this is how the intergenerational cycle continues.
Yeah. Woo, girl. When you talk about this, you sort of like see how far back this could go. Like this is hundreds
Yeah.
of years of stuff that we're becoming aware of now. And it's just I guess transformative when you even just gain that awareness. Just maybe
Mm.
look at what you're doing, and is it something that was done to you? Or I say done to you because our parents didn't know any better. And it's taken me a long time to be able to say those words without like, your parents.
Yeah.
Like, I get it now. I get it. I get it. I love my parents.
Ah,
There's been a lot of forgiveness that has come from none. Like I was brutal to my parents, as you know. Um, but I think as well, when we look at what a trigger is, can you first explain to me what is a trigger for those who don't know what that is?
yeah. Yeah, it's a great question. I actually shared this on Instagram yesterday because a lot of us don't actually know that we're being triggered constantly throughout the day. And as you know, since you've been on this journey with me, you're like, oh my God, it's only now that I realize that there's hardly much that affects me now compared to how it used to be. But we adapt. That's what our body does to survive. But basically, a trigger is normally it's a feeling, the way that I'm just trying to put myself back into the place that I used to be. And it's not that you have a thought because you're not aware of the thought. So it's subconscious, it's below your awareness, but these thoughts are constantly reeling. You run by them 95% of the time. But it's a feeling I would go from. So any form of reactivity that causes you to dysregulate and go into a low vibrational state, which means that your mood changes, you're not as happy as you used to be. Maybe you're a little bit more frustrated or irritable, or you want to control the situation. It's a feeling. You go straight into the feeling of feeling uncomfortable. That is a trigger. That shows you that you have gone back into old patterns, back into your conditioning. You think you're still in the current situation that you were in the past, and you're not. You're just faced with a life event, or your child, you know, challenging you in some way. And this reaction, so, you know, getting really frustrated, easily irritable, angry, avoiding even, are all signs that you've been triggered in some way.
And I guess with a trigger, what are some signs like that someone might be able to feel within their body that they're triggered? Because I think sometimes you can be like, I'm not triggered. Like I know for me, I get tightness in my throat, and I get heat all over my body. I get really, really hot. Is there anything else that I guess you could be aware of as a mum when you're starting to get stressed out?
Yeah, like for me, for example, I had severe stomach issues, like severe, like constant cramping. Um, I had multiple tests at the hospital done, and then they eventually diagnosed me with IBS. Now, knowing what I know now, as women, we store all of our stress in our womb, in our stomachs. That's where our emotions are met. You know, that's where they're held. And if we're not actually letting them out, then they compound over time and they start to create physical symptoms, which for me was severe stomach cramps, pains, like couldn't describe how uncomfortable it was. Where now, since doing this work, I've never had those symptoms ever, since that time. So it can show up in many different forms, but for the majority of women, it is stomach issues, like diarrhea, constipation, bloating, stress that has been compounded into the stomach area that has no idea how to get out. So then it causes the physical symptoms. But like you said, the tightness of the chest, maybe it's tingles through the body. Often, our posture, even if we're in a slumped posture, it's knowing that our auric field isn't open. We actually don't have the confidence and the power and the radiance that we're actually closing ourselves off and we're actually contracted. So even just signs like that, constant headaches, mild migraines, all of these are signs and symptoms that your body is in a stress state.
And I guess when we go into that stress state, so I guess I'll jump in here with what I've learned, and correct me if I'm wrong. We go back really into our primal brain. So we go back into the fight or flight part of us, and that's activated. And that is when often, like for me, I would get panic attacks very early on in the piece, and then it flowed on to full-blown OCD and that sort of thing, and I was living in that state of fight or flight, and I didn't know that that was the case. Would you agree that people that live with anxiety and depression day to day, and like for me it was like years, that they're living in that state of survival?
Yeah, absolutely. So the primal state, or the primal part of the brain, is the amygdala, which is the alert system. So it's one of the oldest parts of the brain. So if you think about back in the day when, God knows, we didn't have computers and emails and, the stress of life, we were faced with quite life-threatening situations like lack of food for the community, or our partners going out hunter-gathering and maybe they won't return, so then we don't feel protected. There was real threatening situations to our our survival. So now, because that part of the brain is still there, is still functioning, that's what's still causing this threat and response, but it actually has no idea whether you're faced with a lack of surviving, like life-threatening situations, or a child that's chucking a tantrum on the floor, or 20,000 emails in your inbox. It just has no idea. So what normally happens is that if we're feeling overwhelmed, and as you know, everything compounds, we become this pressure pot. I just like to simplify things. I don't like to do the jargon of psychology. I just like to speak in, normal language. I feel like it hits home a lot better. So we become this pressure pot. And from that space is that we get overwhelmed, and any form of trigger, no matter how big or small it may be, causes this overreaction. And that's because you've not been emptying your pot, so to speak. You've not been filling your energy. You've been giving out and giving out and giving out. So then it actually doesn't take long. And this doesn't happen overnight. We're talking about compounding over years. So a lot of people come to me in the 30s and go, oh my God, I was really great in my 20s. What happened? And it's not something that just switches overnight. It's actually compounding to the point that your body cannot handle it anymore. Like it just can't. So that's when it starts to show up in many different ways, such as like what we call mental health, or emotional dysregulation, or physical pain, or any form of physical ailment. And that's because this amygdala is constantly in a survival state, and your brain and your spinal cord are actually what makes up the central nervous system. So if your body is constantly in a state of alert, your central nervous system is always hypervigilant. That means that the frequency you're radiating out, and I think I've shared this previously, but when we're in a survival state, the energy that we have, as you know, like I'm big on energy, we have this beautiful field of energy gets sucked in order to create this cocktail of hormones to keep us in a survival state. And this is when we start to get burnt out. This is when we start to then go to the doctors and say, I can't cope anymore, or all I want to do is sleep, or I'm not sleeping enough, or whatever the symptom is that's coming up for you. But basically all that is that your brain is keep firing. It's signaling to your central nervous system you're in a state of threat. From there, your energy is weakened, and then you start to get all of the symptoms. The body's just trying to give you a message that you're out of balance. You're not listening, is what it's trying to say. You are not listening to these symptoms, but as you know, like we both come from the medical field, that we've been trained to think we're sick and there's something wrong with us and we need to fix it with a pill. And it's just not the truth. We just need to listen. Like, what are we doing? What pattern do we keep acting out that isn't serving us anymore, that's causing us more harm than good?
Yeah. And I like, even as you were talking just then, I think that was one of my biggest hurdles. And I discussed this with Catherine last night from The Light Becomes Her. But I was saying that even having stepped foot in the system, when I walk into a hospital, which is, I'm obviously a nurse, quite often I can feel there's a shift within me. And I think a lot of it comes from being in a system where I saw that people don't really get better with this stuff. It's a revolving. They get well enough,
Yeah.
they leave, the same life triggers, the same stuff happens, they come back. And so when I was given a slip of paper saying you have generalized anxiety disorder, I was like, oh, life's over, life's done. And I think one of the main points I want to get across in this whole chat with you is that that is so not the case. Like, I would, and I genuinely believe this, that I don't identify with having OCD and generalizing anxiety disorder. That this isn't a thing for me anymore. But it's taken a lot, and it had to be like a radical investment in someone that I just had to blindly go in, because I knew that I couldn't keep living my life the way I was living it.
Yeah.
And I had a question pop in while you were talking about talk therapy. So for those who don't know talk therapy, it's literally where you go in, you sit down with your psychologist and you chat about what's going on. And so I did that for about 8 months after I had Flynn, probably maybe 20 sessions. And I kept saying to my beautiful psychologist, a really lovely lady, when am I going to feel normal? And she's like, now, right now, it's done. We're done. We're fixed. And I'm like, huh? So why does talk therapy, why is that not the same as regulating yourself and coming out of fight or flight?
Well, I think there's different reasons that I've reflected on. Like, talk therapy for me, it keeps you in the victim state. It keeps you justifying the reason that you feel the way you feel and blaming your past, rather than feeling empowered from your past and seeing that you've been gifted and actually getting strength from it. So, there's so many different modalities in talk therapy. So, this doesn't mean that every single person is going to be this way. But for me, really understanding about how trauma becomes stored in the body, I didn't understand how talking about the story was actually helpful. So for me, it's around actually avoiding going into the story and talking about, what does it make you feel? What does this mean about you? Because often, as we've spoken about, we want to blame mum and dad. There's an inner child within us that goes, I want to be seen. I want someone to acknowledge the pain that I felt. But the truth is that you're just continuing the suffering for yourself because you have an expectation that someone outside of you is going to take away your pain. And they can't. We've both done this, Brie. I did it for years of, I just want mom to take responsibility and tell me that she's sorry, and that's going to make it all better. But the truth is that the emotions are not in our body, in our memory within our body, and in our implicit memory. So no matter what mom does or says, I'm still going to be triggered by other women because I have a mother wound, and I have a daughter. So that means she's going to highly trigger me. So I knew from that point that I had to take responsibility. I had to work on forgiveness and acceptance and feeling these feelings, understanding my emotions, not being afraid of them. And this was huge for me because I hadn't felt ever, I don't think, in my life, emotions. I took the story that they were weak and you weren't a strong, independent woman if you were emotional. But that was me just driving hard from my masculine energy because I'd repressed the feminine within me because of the resentment I held towards my mom. So it was around nurturing that side of me then to really understand that no one else can change this other than me. No one can do this other than me. So when we're talking to someone about reeling over that story, I just feel like victim state, especially if you look at vibration, it keeps you in the lowest vibration. And what I want for myself and everyone around me is to feel in control and empowered. So when we're looking at neuroplasticity, if you just talk about the story over and over again, and I went to 11 different psychologists when I was doing my uni degree. I was like, you know what? I'm going to be the scientist in my own life. I'm going to go learn from some people. And I was mortified. I was mortified at what I was told, the projections from them onto me, telling me that I must have been abused in some way. or I must have been in a domestically violent environment when I grew up. So then my mind was like, oh, maybe I was. But then I was like, no, I wasn't. Like, yeah, my parents were managing the best they could, but there wasn't anything really horrific or, violent in my past. But then you start to like take on what they're saying. And this is what the dangerous part is. If your therapist isn't doing the work, then there is a lot of projection that can come onto you. But not really feeling that connection and that humanness was another thing as well. So as a psychologist, you can't share your own story. You can't be vulnerable. You can't personalize. So for me and a lot of people that I've heard of that have been in therapy is that they just didn't feel that connection. And the connection, the therapeutic alliance, as you know, it's around safety and feeling secure and trust. Because I know for you, if I trigger you in some way, or there's something going on for you, you wouldn't think twice about coming to me and telling me about it and saying, Laura, you triggered me. What is this about? Because you know it's actually about you and not me. And that's because we've cultivated that safety and trust for you to heal that. So if none of that is going on in talk therapy, first, there's a huge barrier, but it's the relaying of the story that's not effective. And CBT talks about changing the story, but it's really difficult to even change the story when you're constantly firing this feeling. You're feeling heightened and you're trying to tell yourself, oh, I'm aware of it. I can, and I'm worthy, I'm worthy, I'm worthy. And it just doesn't work that way. You have to feel it first. And without feeling it, it's really hard to tell yourself the story, as you know. So it's really coming back into the body and learning how to clear that energy, stored energy, so you're not heightened and triggered easily. And then you actually find that you can talk about your past and you don't actually have any attachment to it. But at the beginning, when there is a huge, huge attachment, maybe you do need to be seen and heard, and that's okay. But it's really understanding that it's not clearing the energy from the body.
Yeah. And I like when I was my son was 8 weeks old when I call it I fell, but I've actually had a word come through the whole time you were talking, and it's reboot.
Yes.
My
Love
system
it.
reboot. And it was debilitating. Like I don't want to relive the story because God knows I've flogged it. But it was debilitating. I couldn't get off the couch. I lost 30 kilos. It was a massive event in my life. But it really catapulted me into I want to heal this. I don't want to band-aid. I want to heal it. And that was when I first jumped on and did a masterclass with you. And this is when you were a baby. The Laura train hadn't left the station. It was like December 2020. And I remember sitting there and I didn't want to hear at that time that it was me to heal. I wanted to be like, no, I've got a psychologist that's telling me that, yeah, it was my parents. And it can be really stark hearing that. It can be like, oh, but once you start feeling, and I mean, for anyone with any sort of anxiety, feeling is scary. It feels really unsafe to feel these things. But once you start to get comfortable and make friends with it, like you feel radically safe to go into situations, even if you feel dysregulated and like, oh, just last night I wanted to shut the computer down during a session with a friend and be like, oh, the computer died. That was like my reaction. I was able to sort of be like, no, it's okay to feel this and it will pass, and I think that's the beauty of feeling things, especially with our little kids. So, when they're having a meltdown on the floor, it's okay to feel dysregulated in that moment, but it's what we do with it. And I guess, obviously at the end I'll chat about what you've got coming up, which is very exciting. But in the moment, so let's just say my little girl is screaming at me or trying to kick me or bite me or full meltdown mode. What can I do as a mum to try and get through that moment?
Yeah, great question. Even just backtracking as well, how you're saying that people who have anxiety are actually terrified of feeling. So true. For the whole life, they've tried to escape the feeling. So when you talk about feeling to someone, it's like, I don't want to do that. All I do is feel. But it's just knowing that it's a different way of feeling. It's not actually, a as terrifying as what your mind has made it be, you know, and we've sat in processes previously and you've gotten through them, and it's more the resistance I find that ramps it up, that makes it bigger than what it actually is. And then when you actually go through it, it's just, you can clear it quite quickly. But if someone was like having a dysregulated child, so I'll just take you through a situation with my son because he's very expressive, he's very fiery, and he's just amazing. He's such a beauty. He's actually my biggest trigger out of both my kids. I thought it might have been my daughter. She's probably taught me to soften a lot more, where Lockie's taught me to regulate myself very quickly while he's expressing himself. But I just tell him that he's safe. So you might be feeling something. So in that moment, I would highly recommend you to be aware of what you're feeling. So if you're feeling overwhelmed or you're feeling, you know, emotional, it's actually okay to cry to in front of our kids. I don't think we do it often enough as parents because we're teaching them it's actually safe to be in emotions and feel them. But I would be dropping down to their level. If you feel safe to do that, dropping down to their level, speaking them in a calm way. And if not, just regulating your breath while they're just expressing themselves. So don't say a word, anchor into your breath through your nose, deep into the belly, nice and slow, even in for 4, holding for 2, and then out for 8. Just focusing on that while your kid is just, you know, creating this tornado around you. And what you'll find is, one, the lack of reactivity is going to help them because they're not gaining that stimulation from you. And 2, you're regulating yourself, which energetically means that they will co-regulate with you. And then 3, you're actually on their level. So there's no power play position between the 2 of you. And what you'll find is when you actually regulate your breath, is that you'll then feel like you can speak and say it's okay to feel, it's safe. Mommy's not going to hurt you. Mommy's not going to leave you. Whatever their fear is, because they're just in fear at that moment. They're just still learning how to regulate the little emotions, still trying to navigate the world. So it's actually up to us to be the bigger person, the parent, and realize that we're in control of our emotions to be able to teach them how to regulate their own. And it's big stuff. You know, I've had my son throw toys around the room, tell me he hates living with me. Like, it's big stuff, which you feel in that moment, you know, and instantly I just want to go into, well, you know, whatever, and project. And it's like coming back in and being like, no, actually, what is that making me feel? It's making me feel like I'm not a good mom. Is that true? No, it isn't. He's just emotional. He's very loved. He loves being here. We've got to come back to the reality. And then now he knows that his room's a really safe space for him to go release his anger. And I think we went through that probably about 8 months ago, if not longer, when me and his dad separated. So I knew that he was going to go through some changes and he needed to adapt to that. So I needed to make sure that I was regulating myself every day and creating space so that I could be there for my kids. You know, and a lot of moms, we go, we don't have time and we don't do this. And it's like, well, no, you're just actually resistant to choosing yourself and giving yourself time. There's nothing more important than filling your own cup so you can actually be there for your kids. Even if that means asking your partner to have the kids for half an hour while you go for a walk, you know, knowing that you don't have to do it all, because as women, we think we do. And we absolutely don't need to keep proving it because we can. We're amazing. But knowing that you can actually ask for support and help, and even if it means the kids watching TV for half an hour while you take yourself to the bedroom and regulate or have a cold shower, whatever it may be. But in the moment when they're feeling that way, it's really around you anchoring into your own breath, because that's what regulates your central nervous system until you feel in a calm state to know you can speak in a loving way rather than a reactive way.
And I think that just touching on partners as well,
Yeah.
quickly, but you know, when I first had Rubes, I was like, okay, I'm the mother, I have to do it all. So when she would be losing it and I would be losing it, because there was part of me that would kick in and I'd be like, I'd feel so much better if I could yell at her, you know? And so I didn't feel better. But I would almost stubbornly refuse to be like to Ben, I need 10 minutes to go and cool off. Whereas now I've seen, if I say that to him, he goes into this like real sexy macho man, like, I'm okay, I'm here, I can do this. Like, I'll regulate, Ruby, you take 10 minutes. Like, it's really even just giving other people the chance to try.
Yeah.
Because I think we as a society, we as women have been taught that we don't need anyone to support us, but it's okay to ask for that support, right?
Yeah. And really, because I navigated through this as well, really, it's around us not feeling enough. So primarily we are protectors, we're nurturers, we can do multiple things at once. But normally what the drive of that, there's a belief underneath all of that that you're not enough. Because if you truly believe that you were enough, you would ask for support, knowing and validating yourself. I've actually done a great job today. The kids are still alive, everyone's fed, and I just need some time for myself. So a lot of it is attached to this feeling of I need to keep proving that I'm enough. And what you find is through that proving is that you get resentful and you get frustrated and you get angry, you feel disconnected from your partner. My partner's not helping me. But the truth is that you're not asking. And when the support is offered, you're not willing to take it because you're still proving. But all this is doing is just giving your energy out. And this is why you feel like you don't have enough. And then the kids trigger you, and then you get dysregulated, and the whole house is a shit show. Where it's just knowing that you are enough and that you can give yourself even 10 minutes a day to just take a breather. And it's actually okay for you to do that.
Amazing.
Um,
And I think some of the smallest things in life, mums often think, or I often used to think, that I have to change my entire diet, work out 6 days a week, like do all of the things to be happy. And it's like, no, like take your hot cacao and go stand on the grass for 10 minutes and just
oh,
like
yeah.
take it easy, And
Mm,
I said the other day, I was like, I've just stood butt naked in the sun for 20 minutes with my cup of cacao. And then I went to work and I sang the whole day. Like I had a great day. Like it doesn't have to be this massive, like, moving the earths to try and get out and logistically do something. It can be 2 minutes of time to really feel.
yeah,
But yes, thank you so much for joining me. I think you have a Discover You program coming up. When does that start?
I do. It's on the 25th of July, which is the first program that you came into, the very first, nearly 12 months ago.
I think if there's anyone sitting on the fence about doing this or even interested, all I can say is just do it. Like it's 6 weeks of, it's not the most comfortable, but it is the most life transforming. And like since doing that program, and I now work with you in a different capacity, it has truly changed my life, my relationship, my marriage, my relationship with myself more than anything. And fuck yeah, some awesome women are in there. So it's just a win-win from me.
Wow.
If anyone wants to find Laura online, she is at Her Successful Mind. She is all over the place. You will see her Instagram, her TikTok, her Facebook, and reach out there because you are a wonderful human. And I wish I could bottle you up and just take you everywhere I go. Well, I do actually.
Thanks, beautiful. You do. You have me all of the time, which is really beautiful. I love the friendship we have. It's amazing. And just seeing your growth. It's huge. I can't wait to jump into that group together when we celebrate our 12 months together and just reflect on how big things have been. And now you're just sharing such a deeper message for other moms to know that it's not who they are, they're not stuck, they can be free from this,
Absolutely.
from anything. It's huge.
Radically free.
Yes.
Like not just like, oh, I feel better. No, you feel great.
Yes, let's all feel great. It's the way to be. Love it.
Thank you so much for joining me.